1944, the Pacific skies were silent no longer. For years, Japan had fought with a confidence that bordered on invincibility. Their navy ruled the seas, their planes had dominated the early skies, and their soldiers fought with unbreakable discipline. Every island seemed to fall in their favor at the start of the war. But deep in the heart of America, thousands of miles away, a new kind of weapon was being born, one Japan didn't even know existed. For months, Japanese commanders boasted that their homeland was untouchable. American planes, they said, could never reach their shores. The Pacific Ocean was too vast, their defenses too strong. Even as the Allies gained ground on islands like Saipan and Guam, the Japanese High Command laughed at the idea of bombers reaching Tokyo. To them, the war might have been turning, but their empire still felt safe behind the ocean's vast curtain. They were wrong. In a secret facility in Wichita, Kansas, engineers, mechanics, and young men worked day and night on something that looked like no plane before it. A silver giant that could fly higher, farther, and faster than anything the world had ever seen. Its name was the B-29 Superfortress, and it wasn't just a bomber. It was a symbol of what American innovation could do under pressure. At first glance, the B-29 seemed impossible. It stretched nearly 100 feet across, its engines powerful enough to lift tons of bombs over thousands of miles. Inside, it carried technology so advanced it seemed like science fiction for the time. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, and radar-guided bombing systems. Every bolt, every circuit, every gear was a product of desperation and genius. America knew it needed something extraordinary to reach Japan, and the B-29 was the answer. Captain William Bill Carter was among the first pilots chosen to train on this new machine. He was young, confident, but also deeply aware of what this mission meant. For months, he and his crew trained in extreme conditions, learning to fly higher than any enemy interceptor could reach. They learned to navigate through storms, icy altitudes, and the endless blue of the Pacific. Every flight was a step closer to history and to danger. Meanwhile, Japan's defenses were focused elsewhere. Their air force, the once feared Zero fighters, had begun to fall behind technologically. Their radar systems were limited, and they believed no enemy could strike from such distances. Their intelligence reports spoke vaguely of a new American bomber, but none of their spies had seen it. None could imagine what was coming. Then, one night in June 1944, a strange sound echoed over Japan's skies. Sirens wailed, but people ignored them at first. They thought it was another false alarm. American planes couldn't possibly reach them. But as the faint hum grew louder, people looked up and saw something glinting under the moonlight. A formation of silver giants was crossing the sky, flying higher than any plane they had ever seen. The B-29s had arrived. From that night forward, the Pacific War changed forever. The first missions were test runs, attacks on industrial targets and military facilities, but even these had a psychological effect. Tokyo citizens, once confident in their safety, now watched in fear as fire rained from the heavens. The newspapers tried to minimize the damage, but rumors spread quickly. The invincible homeland was no longer untouchable. Inside his cockpit, Captain Carter stared down at a glowing map as his crew prepared to drop their payload. "We're over target," his navigator whispered. The bomb bay doors opened, and for a moment, everything went quiet. The kind of silence that happens right before history changes. Then, the roar of engines, the whistle of bombs, and the blinding light of explosions below. Factories, docks, and military depots erupted in flames. The B-29s turned back toward the ocean, leaving behind a stunned and disbelieving Japan. But the journey home was never easy. Many planes didn't make it back. Engines failed. Enemy fighters swarmed the skies, though few could reach the bomber's altitude. Still, every mission carried unbearable tension. Carter often thought about the men who depended on him, the gunners, the radio operator, the flight engineer, and how one mistake could end them all. In those moments, 30,000 feet above the Pacific, bravery wasn't loud or heroic. It was quiet, patient, and steady. As the months passed, the B-29s began to reshape the war. Japan's cities burned night after night. Their once proud industries struggled to rebuild under relentless bombing. Yet what made the B-29 truly terrifying wasn't just its destructive power. It was the message it sent. America could reach anywhere, anytime. The ocean no longer protected Japan. Still, for the men flying those missions, victory came at a cost. The heat inside the pressurized cabins, the long hours in thin air, the sight of cities engulfed in flames, all of it left marks that never faded. Carter wrote in his journal one night, "We fly to end a war, but each time we return, I wonder what's left of the world below." By late 1944, Japan was desperate. Its commanders scrambled to develop new defenses, ordering night fighters and anti-aircraft guns, but the B-29s flew too high, too fast. Their power plants could only touch the edge of their flight path. Japan's generals held meetings deep underground, arguing over how to stop the raids. None had an answer. Then came the mission that would seal the B-29's reputation forever. It wasn't just another bombing. It was a demonstration of total reach, total precision, and total dominance. From bases in the Marianas, hundreds of B-29s lifted off into the night sky, engines roaring in unison like a storm. The targets were the very heart of Japan's war machine: factories, rail lines, and supply centers feeding their military. When dawn came, smoke covered the horizon, and millions knew the war had changed. For the first time, Japanese civilians began to question what their leaders had promised them. The empire that once claimed divine protection now faced an enemy from the sky it could not touch. The same planes they had mocked as too big, too slow, too impossible now haunted their nights. As Captain Carter landed back on Saipan, exhausted and shaken, he looked out over the runway filled with returning bombers, some limping, some missing friends who hadn't made it. Ground crews ran to refuel, repair, and ready them for the next day. There was no celebration, no cheering, just the heavy understanding that the war was far from over, but something irreversible had begun. Japan had finally seen the weapon it once said could never exist, the weapon that could cross oceans, crush factories, and erase the illusion of safety. The weapon that would in time bring the empire to its knees. The winter of 1945 brought with it a silence Japan had never known before, a silence born from exhaustion and fear. The air raid sirens had become a part of life, their wails echoing through every corner of the nation. Entire cities had vanished beneath clouds of smoke, and the once proud empire that had stretched across Asia now found itself gasping for breath. In Saipan, the airfields buzzed with constant motion. Mechanics worked without rest, pilots slept in their cockpits, and the ground shook with the roar of four-engine bombers taking flight one after another. The B-29s had become more than machines. They were the voice of a nation determined to end the war, no matter the cost. Captain Bill Carter sat quietly inside his aircraft, Silver Ghost, staring at a photograph of his wife and newborn son. He had missed his child's birth, but he told himself it was for something bigger, that ending this war would give his son a world without it. The missions were relentless now. They flew by night, their altimeters glowing faintly in the dark cabins as they crossed thousands of miles of open ocean. Each flight was a battle against not only the enemy, but the elements. Engine fires, icing, exhaustion, all could kill as easily as enemy gunfire. Yet the men flew on, bound by duty and the hope that each mission brought the world closer to peace. When they reached Japan, the glow of burning cities could be seen from 50 miles away. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, names that once represented the heart of Japan's industry, were now seas of flickering orange light. But inside the planes, there was no joy in what they saw. Carter often said nothing as he guided the B-29 through the smoke, his hands steady on the controls, his heart heavy with the weight of what they were doing. Then came a new order, an operation unlike anything before. The generals called it a fire mission, a strategic bombing designed to break Japan's will completely. The bombs wouldn't just destroy factories, they would burn cities to the ground. Napalm-filled canisters designed to ignite everything they touched replaced the usual payload. The crews were uneasy. Some called it necessary. Others called it something else. On the night of March 9, 1945, 279 B-29s lifted off under the cloak of darkness. Their target? Tokyo. Carter's crew flew in silence, the tension palpable. Below them, millions of people slept, unaware of the inferno about to descend. At exactly 12:08 a.m., the first wave dropped its firebombs. Within minutes, the city erupted into flames. The wind carried the fire from block to block, merging hundreds of small blazes into one vast storm of fire. Pilots described the sight as unreal, a living ocean of flame. Entire neighborhoods vanished within seconds. The heat was so intense that it lifted the B-29s higher, forcing the pilots to fight for control. For hours, they watched from above as Tokyo burned. Carter's radio operator sat frozen, whispering, "God help them." When they returned to base, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. That night, over 100,000 people perished. Tokyo, the heart of the empire, was gone. And yet, even after that, Japan did not surrender. Their military swore vengeance. Their leaders spoke of honor and sacrifice, urging civilians to prepare for an invasion. They believed the Americans would have to land on Japanese soil to end it, and that they would fight to the last man. But the Americans had one final weapon left. The B-29s had paved the way for something darker, something that no one, neither soldier nor scientist, fully understood. For months, secret meetings had taken place in New Mexico, where a group of scientists worked on a weapon that could end wars forever, or end humanity. The code name was Manhattan. The result was the atomic bomb. Carter didn't know the full details, few pilots did, but he knew something was different when he was called to a closed briefing in July 1945. The officers spoke in measured tones. The mission was top secret. Only one plane would carry the weapon. It was to be escorted by 2 observation aircraft. The target? Hiroshima. The men chosen were among the best. Colonel Paul Tibbets would pilot the B-29 Enola Gay. Carter, though not on that crew, watched from the runway as the planes took off that fateful morning. He didn't cheer. He didn't even salute. He just stood there, knowing that whatever that plane carried, the world would never be the same. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the sky above Hiroshima turned white. The explosion was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A single bomb flattened an entire city. A mushroom cloud rose miles into the air, and the light of it could be seen from over 100 miles away. Tens of thousands died instantly, and thousands more in the days that followed. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. Japan finally surrendered. Carter received the news while preparing for another bombing run. The base erupted in celebration, but he didn't feel like celebrating. He sat in the shade of his bomber, staring at the horizon, trying to process what they had done. The war was over, but at what cost? In the weeks that followed, he flew over Japan again, not to bomb, but to drop food and medical supplies. The once bustling cities were now quiet ruins. Smoke still rose from some buildings. Children wandered through the rubble, clutching whatever pieces of their old lives they could find. Carter lowered food crates from the plane, watching the survivors wave weakly up at them. In that moment, he understood the strange paradox of war, that sometimes peace is born from unimaginable destruction. When he finally returned home, he was welcomed as a hero. Parades, speeches, applause, it all felt distant to him. He smiled for the cameras, hugged his family, but the war followed him. At night, he dreamed of the glow of burning cities, the roar of engines, and the silence that followed every mission. He had helped end the war, but he would always carry the memory of what it took to end it. In Japan, the people rebuilt slowly, determined to rise from the ashes. The weapon they never saw coming, the one they once thought impossible, had destroyed their empire, but also forced a reckoning that reshaped their nation forever. Years later, Carter visited Japan as part of the peace delegation. Standing in Hiroshima, he stared at the memorial built for the victims. A Japanese man beside him, perhaps once a child during the war, bowed deeply and said, "We all suffered. Let's make sure no one ever does again." Carter nodded, unable to speak. The B-29 Superfortress had been the symbol of America's strength, its innovation, and its resolve. But it had also become a symbol of the terrible power humanity held in its hands. The weapon Japan never saw coming had ended one war, but also started a new era of fear, one where nations understood that the next war could end everything. As the sun set over Hiroshima's Peace Park, Carter took one last look at the sky, the same sky he had flown through decades ago. It was calm now, blue and endless. And for the first time, he felt a small measure of peace, knowing that perhaps the greatest victory was not in winning a war, but in making sure it would never happen again.